Really, just let me know. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Hello to our online audience as well. We're so excited that you could join us for our conversation tonight on breaking generational silence with Deanna Jimenez and Nicole Russell-Wharton. I'm Izzy. I'm the Public Events Manager for California Institute of Integral Studies, which you may know is a nonprofit university in San Francisco. We're gathered here in our lovely San Francisco campus, and we're also, strangely enough, gathered online as well. So we must honor the land where we're rooted, where we live and work. So I'd like to honor the Ramaytush Ohlone people, also known as Yalamu in the Ramaytush language, which both signifies the people and the territory, who are the continual caretakers and original peoples of what we know as the San Francisco Peninsula. If you're early in your journey and would like to know more about Native lands, languages, and territories and support organizations local to your area, please take a look at the website native-land.ca. It's in the event description below this video, and it is a great starting point to learn more. Yeah. Before we start, I'll go over a few general tips and troubleshooting items. We will have a Q&A tonight. For those of you in the room, we'll have a floating mic. So we'll pass you the mic and you can ask the question into it just with a little raised hand. And for those of you in the ether online, we have a Google form where you can submit questions and it will zoom over to an iPad and we'll be able to read those questions over here. So feel free to submit a question at any time using the form that is in the link below this video. Also, if you're online, you can toggle auto-generated captions on and off using the CC button in YouTube. Now, I'll introduce our presenters and we'll get right to the conversation. Deanna Jimenez is an assistant professor at California Institute of Integral Studies in the Somatic Psychology Department and a somatic transpersonal psychotherapist in private practice supporting individuals and couples. Her clinical work is centered in the dialogue of mental health as it intersects with race, culture, and spirituality. She received a bachelor's in international relations from UC Berkeley, studying the efficacy of conflict resolution and cultural awareness in the international workplace. Following a career in corporate and nonprofit fields, Deanna received her master's from John F. Kennedy University in transpersonal counseling psychology. Through an eclectic body of training, she uses a freedom-focused approach to support clients who have dedicated their lives to transformative justice movements, in supporting people of marginalized identities to build a solid spiritual embodied foundation. We raise collective consciousness while dismantling systems of oppression. Nicole Russell-Wharton is a certified trauma-informed healing instructor. She is the founder and executive director of the Precious Dreams Foundation, a global nonprofit organization that advocates for mental health and the well-being of children, and the owner of Restorative Commons, which promotes equity by way of rest and resources for advocates and community change makers. An accomplished author, her best-selling YA self-help book, Everything a Band-Aid Can't Fix, is a cornerstone resource for teens across the nation and is integrated into middle and high school curriculums. Inspired by her own journey with ADHD, her first children's book, My Busy, Busy Brain, encourages young readers to embrace their unique challenges and advocate for themselves. Nicole's impactful work has earned her numerous accolades, including Glamour's Everyday Hero of the Year, Observer's Top 20 Heroes Under 40, and recognition in O, the Oprah magazine. Most recently, she was honored by NBC and Essence for her tireless efforts to support the mental health needs of youth during the pandemic. With unwavering empathy and bold leadership, Nicole Russell-Wharton is on a mission to teach the world how to nurture young people's voices, empowering them to advocate for their well-being and futures. She calls New York City home. And now I'd love to pass it over to Nicole and Deanna.
Thank you. Well, hello. Hi. I'm going to adjust and try to put this microphone in the proper way. I want to appreciate the audience for coming in this weather to see us. Yes. And I really want to appreciate you. I appreciated reading the book, and thank you for coming to speak with me with CIIS Public Programs on this very important topic, breaking generational silence.
Thank you for having me. I flew across the country for this. I was so excited about it. And it's an honor to be here in the Namaste Hall. So I think that kind of sets the tone for how this conversation is going to go.
Right, right. I have my notes just in case there's some really important points that you explored in the book that I didn't want to miss. But I want to start with just the bravery of writing the book. How I experienced it was this autobiographical, psychoeducational how-to. And I just want to really appreciate and acknowledge what it took to write that. How-to guide that can be accessible to people no matter where they are in their personal healing journeys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wonder if we can start off by just defining generational silence, because that can mean a lot for a lot of people. So I want to really hear from you. Like when you use the term in the title and in the book, breaking generational silence, what specifically are you saying?
Yeah, so the book was actually originally called Generational Silence. The breaking we threw on at the last minute. And so generational silence is a term that's often used in psychology and sociology, and it kind of represents conversation or lack of conversation and avoidance that takes place across generations on specific topics. And when I started this book, I had to first define silence and why I saw it as such a negative thing. And what I learned is that there's so many healthy forms of silence that we do and we practice on a daily basis. I mean, you guys are practicing silence right now because you're active listening. But we practice silence to ground ourselves. We practice silence to meditate. We practice silence to be respectful of others. We practice silence when we don't know what to say, but sometimes we just want to be physically present. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of good silence in my life, and I can acknowledge that. But for me, I wanted to break the habit of carrying bad silence, unhealthy silence from generation to generation within my family. And that was our hesitancy in speaking around topics that made us feel uncomfortable, holding secrets, preventing future generations from healing from things that our elders had to face. And in many ways, I think when you're in survival mode, you're not necessarily thinking about the next person or the person that's going to come after you, and that they may also have to deal with some similar things. But I think for me, with my personal experiences and then, why I was so inspired to write this book, it came from a place of frustration around the silence that was harming me. And the silence that was not only harming me, but I could see how that same silence would hurt the future generations in my family, my niece and my nephew, and now my son. And so as I was writing, I began, it's part memoir, but it's also, there's tools and tips for how I went about having these conversations. And I wanted to help other people essentially break that cycle. And so the book became Breaking Generational Silence. But, I want to always stress we are breaking the unhealthy silence. That is the silence we need to get rid of and cut out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for clarifying that. And I'm hearing that there's something around, like, if we're discerning between healthy or unhealthy or good or bad, if we're going to hold it like that, there's something around the person having choice. Mm-hmm. And this moving towards the betterment of the individual as well as generations ahead. So if we're defining healthy as one that is supporting the present and future generations. Yeah. And releasing, in a way, you said that there are reasons why we might have had to hold silence, but that we're in our practice releasing the past necessity for silence. We're now able to release it.
Yeah, and I think just acknowledging when the silence is necessary. When we think about grieving, silence plays a big part in the process of grieving, because the trauma of losing someone that you love, someone who is very close to you, it is a very personal experience. No matter the relationships that you guys have in common, no matter who they are to other people, it could be a parent, and you could have siblings, and you will all hurt very differently. And through the grieving, you need to take time to process how you're feeling, to reflect on the memories. I think to process the words unsaid, to think through what you wish you could have done differently, or what you are being robbed of now by losing that person. And so, as much as gathering and community and storytelling is part of the processing, we also need time to ourselves. And so the silence is necessary, but it is not a forever coping tool. And so as we process, we then need to release. Now that I have made sense of all of this in my mind, how do I release so that I am not holding all of this weight, and I can let it go, and I can be free, and I can free myself of the pain that I am carrying because of this loss. So at some point, the silence needs to turn into a release. And whether that's in the form of one-on-one conversation with a therapist, maybe it's just with a trusted friend, or maybe it's with a family member, but we need to release. It's part of it. It's part of the healing journey.
And what comes up for me is every behavior is appropriate in some circumstance. So again, to being able to discern and be in choice on how is this silence supporting me? How may it be harming myself or future generations, so that I can then in that moment be in choice on how I want to move forward.
Yeah. I think also acknowledging our feelings around the silence, because when we're silent because we don't know what to say, we can say that. We can say when we're not ready to talk, if we need more time. I think it's important. Communication is just important because we can't read each other's minds. And so if I am yearning to speak to someone and they are isolating themselves or choosing not to speak to me, that's harmful for me to process. So I think just telling the other person, I'm not ready, I need some time, and that's good enough. That's good enough.
I've so many thoughts came through my mind. I want to maybe start with just the cultural context. As a Black identified woman in a family, I'm curious how that, what the universality, maybe the universality or the unique experiences of generational silence in your family of origin, or as a Black family.
Yeah. Oh man, as I did this deep dive on silence and what it means, and you'll see in the book, I started to go back generations and generations, as far as I could possibly go, to make sense of our silence and to understand, were these taught behaviors? Why were people choosing not to speak?
What parts were adaptive?
Yeah. And so, with any family that has experienced significant trauma, they are more likely to deal with generational silence, because it is how they hold themselves together. It is part of being in this survival mode. And so my people, African-American people in this country, were taught to suppress their emotions. Their feelings did not matter. There were no healthy outlets. Even the church, which I speak about in the book, even at church, Black people were told, do as your master says, obey your master, don't talk back, all these things. And so what if your master is the one that's harming you? So what are you teaching? What are you teaching people? There was literally no escape. And I mean, we see in society that there was a huge stigma around mental health in the first place. So I think we've all been on this journey to catch up in terms of self-care and mental health, because oftentimes it isn't something that was passed down or taught within our own families. But, I think about how difficult it was for my elders and my ancestors to cope when they were being physically and emotionally and spiritually abused and told to take it on a daily basis. And I could see how going down the line, even as we advanced, we would tell our children to suck it up. It's not that bad, to get over it, because those are all things that we were told.
Right.
So I think every family, and I write about this in the book, but every family can, if you ask the right questions, can figure out where the silence began. And I think it's very evident in this country for African Americans where it started. And so a lot of times when you look at broken systems, my nonprofit, the Precious Dreams Foundation, we serve kids in foster care. And I'm consistently examining why there are so many broken Black and brown families. And there's a history of it here in the States. And back into times with slavery, I mean, children were sold and mothers would walk from home to home trying to find their children. And they were just separated from their children. Some of them were never united. They would put ads in the paper trying to find their children. And that's not a hard, that's not an easy pattern to break.
Right.
When you're being broken on the outside.
Right.
So there's still so much work that needs to be done. But I think if families can start looking within to heal, and they can lean on each other and build that community inside the house, it makes it so much easier to face the world.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't have the experience of church growing up, but I did have the experience of, in order to move forward, in order to progress, we can't cry over spilled milk. We can't focus on those things that aren't working. We're going to focus on the things that are. And so it just brings back to me like the ways in which the term generational silence, some of it is adaptive, some of it is based in trauma, and then others is the form of adaptation of resilience. And also just really emphasizing how you're saying around the communication. And with this, with these experiences and everyone holding it uniquely, how do we foster support? Like maybe if you have some thoughts or reflections on that, how do we foster when all of this is happening within a household? How do we foster the healthy communication in order to shift this generational silence?
It starts with one person. It really does. It starts with one person. And, when we started this conversation, you thanked me for my bravery. And it takes bravery. It really does, to be the person to raise your hand in a room full of people who may not want to speak. But you also have to recognize the power that you have in speaking, and how what you have to share can possibly shift the family dynamic and help and heal and save other people. Even if they're not ready in that moment, what you're saying will be heard, it will be digested. And so I always just say it starts with one person, and you don't have to dive deep immediately, but you just need to talk. You need to sit around the dinner table and ask questions. You need to check in on a Sunday and maybe just ask someone about their childhood, things you've always been curious about. People love to talk about themselves, not necessarily their trauma, but people love to share stories about their experiences. And, one thing I recognized in writing this book is especially our elders, they're not asked enough. They really aren't. There aren't enough people saying, what was high school like for you? Or what was who was your first love? Or what did you want to be when you were a child? Did you end up pursuing that? You know, questions that almost set them free in a way, because they have been living their lives and pouring into and investing into the generations that have come after them and helping to raise these families. And not enough people have looked up and said, but what about you, Grandma? What did you want to be? Yet they invest so much time trying to cultivate this space for those who come after them to know that they can be anything or do anything that they want to do. So I think that you'd be surprised in just picking up the phone and having conversations to ask, starting with simple questions, just getting to know your family members better. And it starts there, and then you begin to develop a deeper, more meaningful friendship, and they begin to trust you more and feel like you have now created a safe space for them to open up and share. So whether the dialogue is just between you and one other person in your family, that's a start.
Yeah. This feels really helpful, and you already began doing it, but what was coming up for me as you're speaking is how to do that, maybe with more specificity, because I noticed for myself that there is something around that bravery and communication, and also like the attunement. If that is not the norm, or if that is not readily available in one's family, what ideas do you have around supporting that bravery to realize or actualize? And you kind of start, it's a slow easing in.
Yeah. It's the bravery that I get complimented on is because of my vulnerability. And so if we could all be more vulnerable, that is what makes other people feel comfortable enough to take down their guards.
Got it.
In the book, I always say, start conversations, especially tough ones, with I statements instead of you statements.
Okay.
So not to come off pushy or to come off judgmental, expressing the vulnerability in how whatever the experience was is making you feel, or the impact it had on you. And like, easy enough, I give an example of the doctor's office and how we communicate with our physicians. And so, you could wait an hour and a half to see your doctor. You could be frustrated. I mean, you're so angry now, you forgot why you were there in the first place. And so your doctor finally walks in and you're carrying all of this tension. You can't say, well, you or your office, made me wait an hour and a half. Like, that's not gonna
Open.
That's not at all. And so the doctor's walking in looking at you like, oh, okay, I see what this is. Yeah. But if you can say, I'm feeling really frustrated, let me just express that before we get into the symptoms and talk about everything else today. I had a lot going on, and because this appointment took later than I expected, or it took more time than I expected, it's really just thrown me off. So I just want to put that out there. And that gives the doctor an opportunity to acknowledge your feelings, potentially express why there was a delay, but then also see you as someone who is open to having a dialogue about how to fix this, rather than you being someone who is coming and being confrontational. And so I think every single person can point to their childhood and feel like someone did something wrong. Someone made a poor decision that had a negative impact on their lives. And so it's easy to say, point the finger and say, so-and-so did this and that. It's harder to say, I've recognized that I have these triggers because I'm still holding on to this thing that happened to me and how I experienced it is still bothering me.
Right.
And it gives the other person an opportunity to explain to you how they experienced it. In the book, I talk a lot about my parents' separation, and it comes from my experience, right? I was a child. My parents were not sitting me down saying, well, here's what mom did and here's what dad did, and this is why it's not working out. So my feelings as a child and even into adulthood, learning how to cope with all of that, were just centered around what I thought was happening. And so even with writing this book and with speaking to my parents, it's given them the opportunity to explain their side of the story, to explain things to me that they felt were inappropriate for a child's knowledge in the first place, because they were trying to protect me. There were so many things they felt I didn't need to know. So,
And that still energetically lives in the field.
absolutely.
So this, as you're speaking of generational silence, there is something also around just the stories that we create when we don't have clarity or affirmation, like being in that unknown, especially as littles.
Yeah.
And so to be able to give that space for the parents or the elders to speak and connect some dots, there's also an opportunity for you to bring some clarity to the sensations, the feelings, the emotions that you are having without any knowing, understanding.
Yeah.
Mm.
And sometimes it could be more healing for the other person than it is for you.
Yeah.
But either way, I mean, just having the conversation is helping you all make some type of progress.
Right, right. I want to, there was a quote that you quoted from Barbara Neely, and you said, I don't know how, well, the quote says, I don't know how to heal a wound and not let it get some air. And that just really, for me, is connected. So in the book, you share your health journey, which pulled you to the breaking point to really initiate these conversations. To often, though, there are things that bring us to that point of bravery. It takes more to stay where I am than for me to cross this threshold that I've been avoiding. So when you named this earlier, but when you propose in what you propose in Breaking Generational Silence can feel quite challenging if the silence is fed by unhealed trauma. Can you share some of those ways in which you built the courage to initiate these courageous conversations with your family? Like like how, in general, yes, conversations, but how, like, what are these like steps in order to build that courage or that bravery?
Oh man, that's such a good question, because the first step was really working on me. And I think everyone needs to work on themselves before they try to fix anyone else or help anyone else.
Or be present for that other person's transformation.
You absolutely
hold the space for their
yeah.
Yeah.
And so what happened with me is I had been on this self-comfort, self-healing, self-care journey for so long, and getting all of these certifications and teaching children how to cope in healthy ways for so many years. This is just naturally part of my life, and I thought that I had figured so many things out about myself. And it wasn't until I had a health scare and a near-death experience that I recognized I actually don't know my body. I knew what it needed to an extent, but when this happens, what do I do? Or when I am triggered to the point of what I think is no return, it's not as easy to go for the walk or to pick up the journal. Like, what do I do now? So before I could even think about writing this book, I had to work on myself. And, there's a lot of people who are judgmental and can point out everyone's flaws except for their own. And I didn't want to be that person that's not seeing myself as an unhealed woman who has flaws, who has room to grow, who has potentially harmed people through conversation in relationships, who has made mistakes. I wanted to see myself as all of those things and be completely open to doing the work that was needed to be my best self. And if I didn't do that work, and if I didn't do extensive hours of therapy, then having conversations with family members would have been extremely triggering for me and potentially cause me to react in ways that would have forced the other person to shut down.
Right.
So I had to learn how to work on myself. The other thing, I read this book called What Happened to You? And it made me start, I became like very obsessive with wanting to know everyone's why. So like, why are you here? Why do you go to school here? Why are you studying this? So like just this obsession with wanting to uncover the layers of people. And what you find with being curious to want to know why and what happened to people, you become less judgmental because you recognize that those behaviors, they stem from something,
Right.
whether it is what they were taught or is the lack of knowledge.
Right.
You know, they always say our parents do the best they can with what they have.
Right.
And so for me to start this journey and for me to start having these conversations with my parents, I needed to be equipped enough to point them in the right direction for traumas that they potentially dealt with that I didn't understand or couldn't relate to. And I also just had to be in a place where I was healed enough to listen.
Right, right. I was hearing you saying point them in the right direction, but I'm really strongly hearing like, how do I point myself in the right direction? Not if, but when these conversations touch a young or unhealed part, how can I continue to tend to myself? So it sounds like another, speaking to another like in preparation for these conversations, if they're not natural or if they're uncomfortable, is really coming from a place, preparing yourself and coming from a place of love, curiosity, you named.
Yeah.
And the word really comes up for me is just being relational.
Yes.
How am I developing this, the curiosity, the trust that everyone was doing the best they could, not in a cliche kind of way, but really being able to feel that in one's bones.
Yeah. And being patient, recognizing that this work is not easy. Breaking generational silence doesn't happen with one conversation. It doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes it takes baby steps. Sometimes it takes people a very long time to feel comfortable enough to open up to you. You know, we all have relationships with people we've known for years, and there are parts of themselves that they may hide from us, or that it took a very long time for them to finally open up. So being patient and recognizing that everyone is on their own healing journey and they will do that at their own pace, and not having any expectation that the outcome of every conversation is going to be what you want it to be, because it may not, and that's okay.
Right, right. And what comes up for me now is to say, and with all that we've just named, if the need in the moment is space, then that's okay too. And it's not this like needing a conversation or this connection or this relation, but that there's something around the time and space also for actually this relationship, for this wound to heal, needs time and space.
Yeah.
And how that can be okay as well.
Absolutely.
Feels powerful and essential, yeah? We spoke in general already, but around the value there might be people here or online saying like, so what is the value? How will this benefit me? And I think we've kind of spoken to, I want to just give some more space. Like, why read this book and why break generational silence? I'm doing fine on my own.
Yeah, and if you are, then that's great.
Mhm.
And I commend you for it. We're all on very different journeys here.
Right.
For me, the value of breaking generational silence internally, it's the healing, it's the understanding what your physical body is carrying.
Mm.
We can learn a lot about our minds and our brains through evaluations, through our education experience. A lot of times we don't actually learn about our physical bodies until we start to have health issues. But that doesn't need to be the case, because through conversation and asking questions, we could actually be equipped to be proactive and set ourselves up for success to potentially avoid some of the health issues that our elders have faced, some of the complications that they've dealt with or even passed away from. There's work that we could be doing as children to avoid those things. So there's a lot of internal benefits. There's the benefit of relationship building.
Mhm.
And it's not just strengthening your relationships with family members. It's strengthening your relationships across the board. I mean, we learn love at home for the very first time, but then we go out in the world and we test it and we make friends and we have romantic relationships, and we're carrying all of those practices that we were taught. And so if we can learn to deal with the most difficult, challenging situations with the people that we love the most, then we really could face anything in our external relationships. So there's a ton of value. The other thing I would just touch on is epigenetics. And so while it hasn't been scientifically proven, there are studies that show we are carrying our ancestors' experiences and their trauma, and understanding that helps us better understand ourselves in how we respond to things and why we think the way we do. I have these extremely vivid dreams, and sometimes they make absolutely no sense to me. I'm like,
Right.
why did I just dream? I can't even put this together. And understanding my family's experiences, they start to make sense.
Right. Epigenetics really is coming forward and speaking that. Yeah. There was something that you said just a moment ago around the value, one around genetics and like physical health, and really that our bodies carry energetically, embed energetically, whether, like you're saying, as a young child, whether we are conscious of it or not, there is a vibrational. So I'm thinking like not only breaking generational silence, but there's also something around breaking generational patterns.
Yeah.
In relationship, there are ways in which we move through the world, which we are in relationship with others that, I mean, I don't want to throw out percentage, but a majority of it is unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So when we can start being curious of bringing to light, like, oh, that is how elder so-and-so, that's just how we know how to communicate. Now going back to choice, is that how I'm choosing to be in relationship moving forward?
Yeah, that actually, so I think about all of the different topics because this book is a journey. It's my own journey, and the inspiration for starting this book in the first place was because I received a diagnosis of thoracic endometriosis. Long story short, but you'll get the long story in the book. I had 6 surgeries in a year. My lung was continuously collapsing. My world was just spinning and turned upside down. And it started with this curiosity around my health and whether or not this is something I was born with, and there were things that I could have done to prevent this from happening. I very well could have received an endometriosis diagnosis much earlier, before it had spread through my body to my lung. But every time I went to the doctor and I shared my symptoms, I was pushed out the door and I was silenced. And I was told that what I was dealing with was unfortunate, but it happens. And if I had known more about my family's history and what the women had experienced with infertility and painful menstruals and all of those things, I would have had the knowledge to educate my doctors and my physicians in those situations and say, no, this is not normal, and this is something that runs in the family, and I want to be tested for endometriosis. I could have done that much sooner. So because of that, I was inspired to start journaling and documenting the things that I knew about my body so I could pass that information on. But as I was doing that, I started to think about all of the other things that I felt uncomfortable talking to my family about, or that I avoided because there were things we didn't speak about. And I thought about one of the topics in the book is finances. And I was so uncomfortable talking to people about money, and I didn't know why. It's like, my money is my money and you need to mind your business. And I made a ton of mistakes with money in my 20s and establishing credit. I didn't have the tools, and it's because my parents didn't have the tools, and they weren't taught, and so they couldn't teach me what they didn't know. And so my husband and I would have these conversations, which he was comfortable having, but I was not. But I was learning so much from him about investing and saving. And I thought, it's not too late to teach my parents these things. They are here and they have the opportunity to prepare for their futures, even in their 50s and 60s.
Right.
And so it was taking those conversations that I was having outside of family and then bringing them in. Was I sure that they would be open to it or even care enough? No. But I figured, if I have this knowledge and it's something that it could benefit them, why wouldn't I just share it? And so in the book, you'll see I go from topic to topic, and I'm just starting to talk about all the things that we never talked about, and it's for their benefit. And in some instances, they were very open to it and accepting and happy that I was sharing. And in others, they were very defensive and didn't want to know or to learn. And that was okay, because I knew that I had at least shared. And if at some point they decided they wanted to be open, they had the information that they could apply it.
Two things come up for me. One is, as you continue to share in different examples, I feel this thread of this reaching back, supporting parents, supporting elders, grandma, while also planting the seeds for future generations. So if parents aren't open to what you have to share, you're practicing communication on how to prepare that for the future generation. So there is no loss in that process of looking back, supporting those of what you've learned, and also preparing moving forward. That feels really powerful. And there was something you were saying, we were talking around like genetics, you could have known so much earlier. There's something around being able to be an advocate for yourself. So even if you're not able to have these conversations, that there is something around, you did like around starting right here, documenting, preparing. So even if you didn't get the information about endometriosis, you would still have your following of what your body needed in order to advocate for yourself, whether it be medically, what have you.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking the other day, I have a 7-month-old son, and I was thinking the very best thing that I can give him is this book.
Mm.
If something were to happen to me today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, he has this book that
As a
is
narrative.
full of
Mhm.
information about his family, and he can use it to protect and save and support his future children.
Mm.
Someone commented on a post the other day, and they said that their mother left them their journal when they passed away. And the person said they read the first page and then just was crying and had to close the journal, and they haven't opened it since because it was just too much
Mm.
to see, what type of pain their mother had experienced. And I thought to myself, well, I'm glad they have this journal, and it might take them some time. But understanding our mother's pain is truly what helps us understand ourselves. Our mothers carry us in the womb for 9 months. We're part of that journey with them,
Right.
and they always say, the baby feels what you feel. We do. We were actually just talking about family trips, and you were saying you would take the kids places and they wouldn't remember. But
Waste of money. Yeah.
yeah, it feels like you're wasting money, but you are embedding all of this energy and all of these experiences in their brains and their bodies and in their spirits that make them feel good, and they will never forget that. And that's stuff that will get passed down, even if they can't pinpoint where they got it from.
That's what has been refreshing for me, but there is something around creating those building blocks
Yeah.
that even when it's not the memory without the photo, that there is something around creating the foundation, like the truths that we hold are ones that are often not, we're not cognizant, like I am safe,
Mm-hmm.
I am loved, I am surrounded by those who care for, like all of those like truths that we hold for ourselves. And they're not always positive, but to be able to create those. I am creative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is. So I'm not sure where we are in time, but one thing that does come up for me is your examples are ones of the diary I have access to it, or the journal I have access to it. I have my parents, I have access to them. I'm really wanting to speak to those who might be listening or might be here and say, what if I don't have access to those people? And you work with foster care. So
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there's something that you could say to this population of folks where, for whatever reason, I don't have access to that historical knowledge. How can I still be a participant in sowing the seeds?
Yeah, so I actually faced a lot of barriers as I was diving into the history of both sides of my family. And on one particular side, it was because my mother has a very small family, and people had passed away. And so there really wasn't anyone to get the answers from. My grandfather suffers from dementia. My grandmother has passed away. And so, my mother didn't have anyone that she could call to kind of make sense with these things. And so as I was writing this and I was looking for more information, I started using the internet and online tools to do my research. Looking through public records, looking for death certificates so that I can understand who was married and why did they die and where did they live. All of this information is public and can be found online. There's, if you trust it, and I am not guiding anyone and making a decision either way, but if you trust it, there's like Ancestry, 23andMe, which I think just got sold. So do your research there. But there are websites where you can, sign up to find family. So that was something else that I did. I found myself messaging on these apps with third and fourth cousins, trying to put the pieces together. And then also, with the little bit of knowledge that I had finding people that knew my grandparents,
Mhm.
finding people that grew up with them and asking them to share stories so that I could make sense of some of these things. And a lot of what I learned about my grandfather was from his wife, who is not my grandmother, but was in her 90s and was still able to recall information from his childhood. And she was the one who, just a year or two ago, was able to teach my mother things about her father that she had never known because she
Wow.
didn't ask the questions.
Wow.
So, there are ways for you to find the information online, but also, if you're curious enough, figure out the town, figure out the church, figure out the school where they went to, and try to find people that were connected and are willing to sit down with you and talk to you.
Right. So you're really inviting this archaeology of one's history.
If you care enough, yeah.
Right,
I was
right.
just, I wanted to know as much as possible. So I was willing to do the work. And, with storytelling, there's no, storytelling is not factual. As I tell stories, they're my experience. And when you ask your parents to tell stories, it's going to be their experience. And it's up to you to take all that information and do what you choose with it. But even in this book, you'll see I interviewed one person and I found out my grandmother had a certain amount of kids. And then someone else who was doing research for me in the town that she grew up in found death certificates of children we had never heard of
Wow.
because she lost babies, newborns. She lost a child that was 2 years old. And I don't know why it wasn't talked about, but it wasn't. And her own children wouldn't have known this
Mhm.
if we didn't find those death certificates.
Wow. Wow. A real opportunity to get to know yourself and to be able to, like you said, create a book or create some information for your little ones, for your offspring to really be able to.
Yeah.
I do want to kind of, what's coming up for me is we were talking around patterns that support or embed this generational silence. And it feels really important, especially in this day and age, to speak of when there are systems of oppression or systems that also reinforce this silencing. And I just want to see if there are any thoughts you have on that around, I guess I'm really noticing when there is the desire, there are also forces. And one thing that I received from your book is when there's a will, there's a way.
Mm-hmm.
How do I really move toward this, stay the course of what feels important for me? For you is like genetically, I need to find out this information.
Mm-hmm.
And just wanting to really acknowledge when there are larger systems of erasure or silencing. Just any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you really need to weigh your options and see which one is more harmful.
Mhm.
So for me, personally, it's more harmful for me to not speak.
Mm.
And the last section of the book is speak or repeat. And so it's really difficult for me to see inequalities and injustice and say nothing.
Mhm.
Because of my line of work with the foundation, it is really difficult for me to see children being harmed, neglected, abused, or abandoned and say nothing. I recognize my voice has so much power that I have the ability to change the trajectory of someone's life. We all have that power.
Mhm.
And I would rather lean into doing that than be silenced because of who I am, it eats at me
Mhm.
physically, mentally, spiritually. I am just such a passionate person that I simply cannot sit back
Mhm.
and say nothing and do nothing because I already have seen what power my voice can have and changing policy and advocating for others and helping to change people's situations. I've seen the power of community. I've seen the power of protesting. I've seen the power of rallying for good. And so because I have been a witness to that, it's just impossible for me to sit back and be a victim.
Mhm.
And everyone is not ready for that.
Mhm.
And that's why I say you have to weigh your options and see what would be more harmful to you and to your family if you don't speak up.
Right, right. Weigh your options. And I'm also hearing that you're not alone. Like that there are, even as you describe yourself or the organization, yours or others, that there are ways for, if there is the desire to really get support, to be surrounded by others that can support with, until the bravery kicks in for oneself, to really be able to be in circle with others that are breaking these generational silences on many levels.
Yeah. You can be in a protest and you don't have to be the person on the microphone, you know? So it's finding your people. It's finding people who are also passionate about the cause and leaning on each other to get the job done.
Wonderful. So we're going to be nearing the close. I want to give you the floor to see if there's anything else that feels important to name or to bring in that hasn't been explored yet.
I would just say that this is not easy work. But what is easy, really? What is worth having that comes easy? So if anyone is hearing this and curious enough to consider having a conversation with anyone, even if it's a cousin, I would say read the book, buy a journal, talk to a therapist right away, and start with you. It's worth it. It really, really is worth it. The other thing that I have learned in this crazy journey of health battles over the last few years is how priceless our breath is and how powerful our breath is. So when you are having difficult conversations, or even when you are preparing for difficult conversations, to just breathe. And before you react, before you respond, just breathe. Take a deep breath, focus on your breath, and let your breath guide you to making the right decision. I cannot tell you how many times I was so nervous to pick up the phone and have conversations with my dad, someone who taught me silence as a coping mechanism. And in order to calm those nerves and the butterflies, I literally just had to breathe and tell myself, how bad can it be? Worst he can say is no, let's just do this. And I'm so glad I picked up the phone.
I hear you really developing this inner, I've heard throughout the interview, there's like a lot of inner dialogue or a lot of inner support. How bad can this be? What's the worst he can say? It's more risky to not say something. So I'm just noticing your inner dialogue that allows you to be present, even in the maybe knees shaking.
Yes, because when you are the first to do something, you are your own coach.
Yeah.
And so there's no one that was in my family preparing me for any of this. So I literally had to guide myself through it.
Yeah. That's what I appreciated about the book, is that sometimes it is said so in sound bites and so easily, just break generational silence. That's what we need to do. And cognitively, yeah, we understand that, we get that, but how do I take this first step?
Yeah.
How do I actually in action right now, break that silence. And that can be daunting, especially if you're the first one, not only in your family, but maybe in your circle, in your community. So you're not just breaking it for your family, you're breaking it for the community in which you are moving. And that can be daunting at times. So the book
Absolutely.
gives some real support around these small reflections or small how-tos in order to take one step at a time.
I guess the final thing I would just say for everyone here and everyone that's listening is the question I want you all to leave here asking yourselves is, how much do I know about my DNA? And if there's anything that you don't know, that you're curious about, it's not too late to find those answers.
Beautiful. I'd like to have a closing thought. A few things that I really appreciated from this talk and from the book, really just emphasizing relationship. There are risks and benefits. The risks are really that even in the discomfort, even in the potential, the ruptures that I'm sure are bound to happen at some level, that you're really building a capacity to have these difficult conversations. And so you're in choice, and there is a lot of upside, whether it be genetically, health-wise, or just really building that capacity of building relationship. You said at one point in the book, great risks are needed for big changes. And this work must include rest. And there's something around holding the balance between looking ahead, while also, I think this was something around joy, being in joy. There's something around looking ahead, preparing for the future, while also just being in the moment. And that feels like a beautiful place for us to pause.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is great.
So we're going to, we have questions. We're going to move to a few questions. And if anyone in the audience has questions, I'm going to go between the questions that are via the folks online, and please raise your hand. From the audience, sometimes when I'm experiencing someone else's silence, I feel activated because silence was used as punishment in my family, even if I know I'm not in trouble. Can you speak to how to navigate this dynamic? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think just going back to what I was saying about communicating with the I statements of how you are experiencing something and how it's making you feel, expressing that vulnerability is really important. And sometimes it's saying, I am having a really hard time right now, not understanding where we are or how you're feeling. Can you please share more? Or can we please talk about this? I think initiating that conversation by telling people how you are impacted is really important, and it gives the other person the opportunity to rise to where they should be in order to have a healthy relationship with you, because everyone deserves communication. It's what makes a relationship healthy. And so I think it's great that, you can acknowledge when someone is using silence in an unhealthy way.
Right.
But certainly give them the opportunity to speak by telling them how you are experiencing it. And then if they continue to be silenced, if they continue to treat you with silence, then that may not be a safe space for you.
Yeah. What comes up for me is like silence being used as punishment. So it brings me back to just the nuance of silence, how it can be used as power, like how everyone's
control,
definition of silence is so different.
Yeah.
And it feels really I'm feeling really for whoever this person is asking the question, the fact you're saying around just awareness, the fact that they understand how silence lands for them is step one.
Yeah.
I'm understanding how silence is used or how this lands for me allows me to be in choice on what you're saying. I can be in choice on communicating it. This isn't my environment. It doesn't feel safe, but that's all coming from that inner work of knowing how the environment is impacting their nervous system.
Yeah. And understanding your triggers,
Mhm.
you know, because if that is something that was used against them in their childhood, then in their adulthood, you have to explain to people why that is so difficult for you to process. And, you know, earlier I talked about patience. That's not easy for everyone.
Mhm.
You know, it doesn't come natural for everyone, especially if you are being triggered. And so you have to express that. I am being triggered. This is what I have experienced. And so it's making it really hard for me to give you space in this moment.
Mhm. Mhm. Beautiful. Check in. I'll keep looking out to the audience. Yes. Oh, Mike.
Hi. Thank you guys for being here. You were talking a lot about the courage and kind of just the process overall of the kind of going upwards, talking to your parents, talking to elders in this process of breaking the silence. And I'm curious, to what extent do you see it as like a bi-directional conversation? And if you do, like, what advice do you have for the elders, for the parents, for yourself with your kids, aside from writing a book, in terms of, you know, breaking the silence or maintaining the brokenness of the silence?
Yeah. One thing I recommend, because I'm not telling everyone to write a book, of course, but documenting I think is really important, because anything can happen to us, and you know, life is so unpredictable. You may have knowledge that you wish to pass on when the time is right, but you may never get that time. So I do think that journaling is very important. And a lot of the conversations that I was having, I would document certain things and keep them in a safe place. But I also, I was working really hard to inspire deep, meaningful conversation in my family. And there are some family members that were very comfortable with surface level conversation. And it's funny because I actually get made fun of with some of my friends. It's like, that's so corny, or like they'll say that you're having an Oprah moment, but like I want to get deep with people. And I think that's what really sets us free when we do that and we create that space. So even if it makes people feel uncomfortable, I think just continuously testing it out and sharing your own experiences with people, modeling the behavior is so important. I hope that the younger generation in my family sees that with me, that I'm constantly modeling this vulnerability and sharing my weaknesses and hoping that they can learn from my mistakes. I'm also always asking my elders about their mistakes. We learn by making mistakes, but it's not often we feel comfortable enough to just openly share with someone else those mistakes that we made. And so, you know, I want my family to see me as this imperfect person that's on this journey to figure it all out one day at a time. And I think the more that you model that behavior, the young ones that are coming up behind you will be inspired. And I think the elders in many ways will start to question the way that they were taught to do things and go about things. Someone that I'm very close to and was working with on this book journey shared that they ended up having a conversation with their mother, and their mother shared, I just didn't think it was relevant. Why would I share any of that stuff? It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't erase it. It still happened. The pain is still there. And the person shared with their mother, but it helps me understand you better. And it actually helps me love you better because I have a better understanding of what you need. And I'm so sorry that you had to experience that. And I want you to know that that was unfair and you shouldn't have gone through that. And I don't think those are words that her mother expected to ever hear. So just modeling the behavior for your entire family and just being that safe space for them, it's going to inspire those that are older and those that are younger.
Thank you for the question. Another question from the virtual audience. Do you have tips on how to work through patterns of generational silence with children?
With your own children, I'm guessing?
Good question.
Yeah,
Maybe
so
either way, yeah.
yeah, I guess with your own children, and I talk about questions. I love questions. Constantly asking questions so that we can understand our children's experiences. You know, a lot of times we expect if our children are in a situation where there's some potential harm, or if they're in a situation where they're uncomfortable, that they're just going to come to us. And a lot of times that's just not what's natural, or they may be afraid to do so. So consistently asking children, how was their day? Did anything that you experienced today make you feel unsafe? Did you learn anything new today? I think constantly asking your children questions is super important, and then honoring their emotions. My son is only 7 months old, but he is so passionate. And words are also very powerful. So there was a family member who used a negative word to kind of explain what she was experiencing when she sees his drastic mood changes. And I corrected it and said, no, he's passionate. He feels things very deeply. And when you are a very passionate person, that's how it is. It's difficult to manage. And so honoring all of those emotions and not trying to suppress any of those feelings and telling him that it's all okay and helping him learn to cope in healthy ways is going to teach him to not only know that there is nothing wrong with feeling, but also how to advocate for himself. You know, advocacy work starts at home. And so allowing your children the space to advocate for themselves there, they're going to go out into the world and do the same. So that's some advice I would give if, you know, you're working to break that cycle with your own children. It's just honoring where they are and what they're feeling and experiencing.
Right. I'm hearing, yeah, if we're speaking of with your children, that there's really just how am I modeling this all the words we've used, communication, vulnerability, and openness, honoring everyone where they are. How are we modeling that in the environment that we're creating for our children in the household, as well as the folks that surround them? And they will learn that, and really at different ages, but really pulling that out, asking the questions, because children may not know to share, like, I have a bellyache and this is, you know, like, so to be able to create that space and develop the language in order to speak to one's experience bravely.
Yeah.
All right, I'll ask another question. Who are other friends, authors, colleagues? I'm going to add like podcasts or something whose work you'd recommend for those on this journey.
That's good. On this journey, a friend of mine that I reference in the book, Debbie Brown. She is an incredible, she's a podcaster, but she is also a healer. And she has a lot of resources and tools. She has a book coming out this spring. I would highly recommend her podcast. I think it's Living Well with Debbie Brown.
Okay.
But if you search Debbie Brown, you can find her podcast. I would actually recommend everyone doing a deep dive on stories about their cultural history,
Okay.
their own unique cultural history, just to get a better understanding of the experiences that your people have been through and what you've come from. And we were talking about erasure earlier, and there are books that are accessible today that might not be available in the future.
Uh-huh.
So I think getting out there and buying physical books, I think it's something that's going to be worth a lot in the future, having those physical books of your history.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend that. And I would say I'm not a big podcaster, but I would say in addition to that, I would say this is a recommendation, but not a go-to. The recommendation is to protect your peace. And so there is a lot of news that we are being fed on a daily basis everywhere we turn, especially on social media. And so protecting your peace sometimes might look like not having the phone, not listening to anything, just being fully present in the space that you are, so that you can be well enough to deal with your own things that are happening within your household, with your community. So protecting your peace and really leaning into the spaces and the places that make you feel well. Another thing that I recommend in the book actually is waking up with a winning habit. So starting the day with something that makes you feel good, and you can decide what your winning habits are. For me, it's walking or writing or working out. I need to either move my body, or I need to wake up and open my journal, or whatever it is, creative writing. That's what helps me in the morning. It gets the blood flowing. It makes me feel good. I think everyone just figuring out, what are your winning habits? What are the things that no matter what is happening in the world, you can go to that or you can do that thing. And it makes everything a little bit easier to digest.
Beautiful. I'd love to add, I don't have specific names of books, but I'm just really wanting to invite, right? I love how you said physical books, as that might change. I remember there was a movie we were looking for and it's no longer available. So if someone does not have the DVD of that movie, like they made edits, I forget, it was not important, but they made edits, they removed the movie and now it's no longer available. So there's something around.
We were just talking
physical.
about a book.
Huh?
We were just talking about a book that you used that
Oh,
now
we
it's hard to find. Yeah, we literally were just talking about this before we got on the
right.
stage. So yes.
I was just wanting to emphasize the physical aspects. And you were also talking around learning one's personal cultural history. I know for my children, who my partner is of a different culture, and I've encouraged them to learn their native tongue so that they're learning the history from not translated.
Yeah.
So there's just something around really learning from, not from the colonizers' words or not from a translated version.
Yeah. Yeah. And then 2 books I would just throw in there. One I referenced earlier, What Happened to You is a good one. And The Body Keeps the Score is another good one if you're interested in learning about how our bodies carry our ancestors' trauma.
Correct. And we have the web now, so we can search generational trauma and see what really do begin the practice of exploring in this. One last question, unless there's something in the audience. The question is, what have you sensed being left out in conversations around generational silence? So as you're writing this book, as you're in these conversations, what would you say has been left out that you'd like to bring in? What are you aware of?
I mean, interestingly enough, I wrote this book because I felt like there weren't enough people talking about generational silence. I mean, there are so many terms that were being overused around generational trauma. In my line of work, generational poverty. I felt like all of these terms are being overused, and everyone is very aware, but we were not speaking enough about silence. So I think the book came from a sense of frustration because I didn't have enough tools and information to do the work. And as I started to look online, I couldn't find enough information on how to do the work. So, here we are, and we have this book out in the world, but I think there's a lack of conversation around this. There's a lack of information around this, and I hope that changes. I hope to see many more books on this topic with additional tools. This book is not from a clinical lens. It's written by a trauma-informed practitioner. This comes from my many years of experience in working with a population of people that experience high intensity trauma. So I hope to see more information out there.
So to digest that there's something around what is not being said, that how do we bring that forward, make space for that to step forward, and that being quite supportive of our next steps forward. Beautiful. Okay, well, I think that this is our time.
Yeah.
And I would love to thank you and then pass the floor to you. Maybe any encouraging words, the morning encouraging words, anything that you'd like to share with the audience here and online.
I'd say final words, the final section of the book: speak or repeat. And as we close out today, ask yourself, how much do I know about my DNA?
Thank you.
Thank you.